Let's bring in Eyal, Hulata, a former Israeli national security advisor and a senior international fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Hannah.
I want to start with the most recent news. As I mentioned, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was hit with a missile overnight. We're also seeing a new report that 5 U.S. refueling planes in Saudi Arabia were hit by Iranian missiles in recent days. Sir, I want to ask your reaction to these latest developments. How are they escalating the conflict?
Well, Iran is clearly trying to escalate the conflict. I think that as the concrete damages that they are suffering, and they are a lot, are being taken, Iran does not have an intention to surrender. They will try to fire the last shot at any given time. So trying to find ways where they can retaliate on U.S. interests and military is something they can do. Israel is far away from them. It's 2,000 kilometers away. They're firing at us all day, all night, not in large numbers, but clearly they're trying to be more effective in shorter targets. And Iraq and Saudi Arabia are closer.
You heard my colleague, Connell McShane, he's in Dubai, talk about the importance of Kharg Island. I would love to hear from you about the crown jewel of Iran, as it's been dubbed, and where the latest U.S. strikes took place. Why did Iran initially say any action against Kharg Island would be a red line?
So I think Iran is trying to protect its oil industry. It's very simple because this is their main source of income, even during sanctions and even now during the war. When they have closed the Strait of Hormuz partially, they did not shut it down from their own tankers, of course, and fuelers. So this is why they treat so seriously. And I think also from the American perspective, President Trump went out of his way not to touch the oil industry, I guess because, or I'm sure, he didn't want to continue to rattle the prices of oil that have been going up and down over the last week or so. So I think this was kind of put on the side. The message from the United States to us, to Israel, was not to touch the oil industry. And when Israel was signaled on tankers that provided oil to IRGC, not even for export, you saw headlines in the United States that this caused some stress in Washington, and I can understand why. I think what President Trump is now saying to the Iranians is, if you continue to close the Strait of Hormuz, there will be consequences. He attacked the military posts in Kharg Island, not the main industry ones, but this is a clear signal of how this can escalate. The Iranians are responding, and I guess over the next day or two, we'll see if this is going on a de-escalation course as it comes to oil, or on the contrary, to an escalation. I think the Iranians will try to escalate if they get a chance to.
The CEO of the largest chemical distributor in the Middle East says the war is not the problem of countries in the Middle East. I want to play a little bit of what he said, and I'll talk to you on the other side.
This war is not ours, and it's not even our making. And I say this collectively as being a member of the Middle East, that this is not our war. And we are caught in this crossfire. And I think that the powers that be in the United States or Israel should be resolving this independent of the Middle East.
Your reaction to those comments?
Well, I can understand why this is said, because the Middle East is supplying about 20% of the world's global energy market, and I don't think this will change anytime in the foreseeable future. So there is an important piece in it. However, this is why this has been causing conflicts for decades. This isn't new. I mean, there were blockades of oil back in the 70s after the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. I can understand why the oil companies try to detach business from conflicts, in this case, very serious conflicts with a lot of religion elements into them, and hostility between countries who want to eradicate not only Israel, but to chant death to America. But it so happens that these are the countries that hold the keys to the Strait of Hormuz, Iran in this case. I do agree that there needs to be found a way to resolve this. Iran taking the world in hijack over oil is their only leverage. I think they should be deprived from that leverage. Whether or not what President Trump is doing in Kharg Island will clear the path to it is yet to be seen. But eventually, I think that this war will end, or the time of this war will be defined by the impact on the energy markets and the oil markets specifically.
Yeah, less than 24 hours ago, the U.S. military was ordered 2,500 Marines and an amphibious assault ship will head to the Middle East. What does that tell you about the next phase of this war?
Well, at the bare minimum, it means that President Trump is signaling that he's willing to escalate. I don't want to make assumptions of if this is focused on Kharg Island and other issues. There are many things that could be happen. I think the U.S. will try to refrain from boots on the ground, but it doesn't mean that there won't be kind of surgical missions that will be carried out. What is clear, and President Trump has been saying this continuously, is that he does not intend to let Iran get their so-called victory picture after all of the damage that has happened, the decapitation of the supreme leader, and all the rest of the things that he mentioned during the night. But I think that President Trump also understands that he better find a way to end this in a foreseeable time frame and not to extend this too long.
Netanyahu has also alluded to Israeli boots on the ground. Could you see IDF on the ground there in Iran?
Well, I think that, again, we could see surgical things happening. I don't want to talk about things that I'm not allowed to, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're already seeing surgical elements on the ground. But this is not what you mean by boots on the ground, or what the American audience understands when we say boots on the ground. When the American audience hears boots on the ground, you hear Iraq, you hear Afghanistan, nation building. Hundreds of maybe 100,000 soldiers in the surge on Iraq. We're not talking about anything remotely close to this. Israel is not deploying this way, by the way. Israel is deploying this way even in Lebanon, even though we've been attacked on the north. There are surgical incursions into Lebanon to protect our towns that are on the border. This is not the way Israel deploys. I'll be surprised if this is the way the U.S. will deploy.
So what's different, according to you, from the Iraq war is strategy this time when it comes to our military. I do want to ask you about Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. On Thursday, he said the U.S. is still investigating that attack on a girls' school that Iran says killed 168 children. I'm wondering if there are any updates. What are you hoping to learn? It's been 3 weeks, and do we know where that missile came from? And, of course, what happens next?
Well, yeah, all I've seen is reporting, I think, like you, what I understand from Israel, that indeed this was not one of our bombs. It's not an area where Israel was operating. I understand that there are still questions about where the intel came from. And I think what's important to say, and I'm not sure this was said enough, so here I am saying it as a former national security advisor, civilians should be kept out of war as much as possible. Israel is not targeting civilian targets directly. This is not the case of what we do. Sometimes there are mistakes. We should be sorry for them. And sometimes there is collateral damage, and we should be sorry for that as well. War is hard. And I think this is also true in the war that we've conducted. We've been getting a lot of heat for the civilian damage in Gaza. This was not the deliberate attempt of what we've done, neither in Gaza nor in Lebanon. And I'm sure this is not the deliberate intention of Israel for sure, also for the United States, as it comes to Iran. This will need to be investigated, and I hope that the truth will come out, because if this is a non-consequential error of what it was, then we should just say it and unfortunately move on.
Yeah, I think at this point, people just want transparency. It's been 3 weeks, and I know the U.S. and Israel have the technology to figure out how this happened, so hopefully we'll find out sooner than later. Before I let you go, the Trump administration lifting sanctions on Russia in order to increase oil reserves. This makes sense to me because now we don't have to depend on the Strait of Hormuz as much. What doesn't make sense to me is we know through our intelligence that Russia is feeding Iran intel when it comes to where our military is, possibly next strategic strikes. So what do you make of that decision to lift sanctions off of Russia to release more oil?
So I want to hope that there is more than meets the eye and just this agreement on the face of things. I'm sure that there were also behind the scenes engagements that may have not been put public about the role of Russia in this. I think Iran is not enjoying the support from Russia or from China, by the way, in the way that they wanted. I'm sure that they're getting some, and I'm sure that they're trying to help them, and not to look as if they're not giving any support to their partner. I wouldn't call it ally, but I'm sure that Iran would have expected Russia for much more. For instance, to come and demand to the Iranians that the United States will stop the bombing. This hasn't happened. So in a sense, I think this is Russia leveraging Iran more than the other way around. I do want to hope that the U.S. is cognizant, and I'm sure that they are, that the intelligence that Russia gave to Iran was directed at the U.S. Targets more than on Israeli ones. And again, I want to be sure in saying, I don't know, but this is what I put my bet on, that there was more in this, and also to keep Russia away from this war. You will get your ability to export oil for this time because the world market needs this. Keep out of the war. Don't engage. Let us finish the job. I would think that this is what the American administration would do.
And Treasury Secretary Bessent says it's only for a short while, so we'll see how that plays out. Eyal, Hulata, thank you so much for the context today. I appreciate you joining me so early this morning.